The long roads of the Roman Empire, mile by mile. Stones, sandals, and the shape of an empire. When you imagine the Roman Empire, you might picture emperors in marble halls, senators in white togas, or gladiators under the sun of the Colosseum. But what truly held that empire together was not gold or speeches or battles. It was the road, mile after mile of stone, sand, and gravel laid out across the ancient world, stretching from the misty hills of Britannia to the deserts of Syria, from the forests of Germania to the rocky coastlines of Spain. The Roman road system, in its full extent, measured over 400,000 kilometers, with roughly 80,000 kilometers paved in stone. To walk those miles today would take years. Yet for the Romans, this network was less a marvel than a necessity. The roads carried armies, merchants, slaves, priests, letters, tax collectors, and ideas. They connected villages that had once been isolated, drawing them into a single political and cultural sphere. If you lived anywhere in the Roman world, the rhythm of your life, whether you knew it or not, was shaped by these roads. The construction of a Roman road. To understand the scale of this achievement, you must begin not with a map, but with the ground beneath your feet. A Roman engineer did not simply scrape a path and lay down stones. The construction followed a deliberate order designed for durability. First, surveyors used tools like the groma to draw perfectly straight lines across the landscape. Hills, rivers, forests, these obstacles were often cut through rather than avoided. The Roman preference was for directness, even if it meant enormous labor. Then workers dug a trench, sometimes as wide as 6 meters. At the bottom went the statumen, a foundation layer of large stones packed firmly. Above this lay the rudis, a layer of smaller stones mixed with lime mortar. On top came the nucleus, fine gravel or crushed stone beaten flat. Finally, the surface, polygonal paving stones carefully fitted together, their edges smoothed by use over time. Along the sides, ditches carried away water, while curbstones held the structure in place. The result was not just a road, but an enduring surface that could last centuries. Indeed, some Roman roads remain visible and even usable today, 2,000 years later. This was deliberate. Roads were not built for convenience in the moment, but for permanence, reflecting Rome's confidence that its empire would endure. The soldiers who built them, yet who laid these stones. You might imagine teams of skilled craftsmen, and sometimes that was true, but much of the work was done by soldiers. The legions were not only fighters, but also laborers, trained to construct fortifications, bridges, and, yes, roads. A marching army could lay miles of roadbed as it advanced, ensuring supply lines followed close behind. In this way, every conquest became a new link in the chain of empire. To a Roman soldier, the work was as exhausting as battle. Moving boulders, pounding gravel, shaping stone blocks, all under the Mediterranean sun. But the reward was not just the road itself. Each stretch laid down meant faster marches, quicker communication, and easier domination of new territories. Milestones and measurements. If you had walked along a Roman road, you would not have been lost. At intervals stood milestones, stone columns inscribed with distances, names of emperors, and markers of authority. They told you how far it was to the nearest town or to Rome itself, the eternal center. The Roman mile measured roughly 1,000 paces, or about 1,480 meters in modern terms. These milestones were not merely practical. They were propaganda in stone. Every marker reminded you that Rome ruled here, that the emperor's authority stretched across this land. Each road was a line of control inscribed on the earth. Life along the road. For ordinary people, the road was both opportunity and disruption. Farmers found their fields cut by stone lines. Villages suddenly saw merchants passing through. Inns, mansions, and capponi sprang up at intervals, offering shelter, food, and sometimes less reputable services. A traveler could find a bed of straw, a cup of sour wine, perhaps a bowl of stew. Soldiers might be quartered nearby. Caravans of mules carried goods. Amphorae of olive oil from Spain, grain from Egypt, glassware from Syria, wool from Britannia. Yet travel was not comfortable. Even with paved roads, journeys were long and wearying. You walked, or if wealthy, rode a horse or traveled in a jolting cart. Dust coated your clothes. The sun burned your face. Bandits lurked in the hills. A letter carried from Rome to Gaul might take weeks, even with relays of couriers. Still, compared to the paths and tracks of earlier centuries, this was an astonishing speed. Roads as tools of empire. At their heart, Roman roads were military instruments. They allowed legions to move swiftly, suppressing rebellion or invading neighbors. A messenger could reach a frontier outpost in days rather than weeks. Governors could travel to their provinces and enforce tax collection. If you lived in a conquered land, the road was a reminder that Rome was never far away. But the same roads that brought soldiers also carried ideas. Christianity spread along them, as did trade networks and cultural exchange. A traveler on the Via Egnatia might carry Greek philosophy westward. A merchant on the Via Appia might bring Eastern spices into Roman kitchens. In this sense, the roads were arteries not just of power, but of transformation. Walking the Via Appia, perhaps the most famous of all was the Via Appia, called the Queen of Roads. Built in 312 BCE, it stretched southeast from Rome toward Capua and later to Brundisium, a port on the Adriatic. Imagine yourself walking its stones. On either side, tombs lined the route, for burial inside the city was forbidden. The inscriptions tell you stories of merchants, freedmen, and patricians. Carved faces look down at you, reminders of lives once lived. As you walk, carts rumble past, pulled by oxen. A group of legionaries trudge by, armor glinting faintly. Farmers lead donkeys loaded with baskets. The road is busy, alive with the hum of empire. Dust rises, coats your sandals, clings to your tunic. And yet, there is also silence, for the road stretches so straight, so endless, that it seems to pull you forward, mile after mile. The weight of distance. Consider what distance meant in this world. For you, A letter can cross oceans in seconds. For the Romans, even with their roads, distance was a burden. A journey from Rome to Londinium, modern London, might take a month or more, depending on weather and obstacles. News of an emperor's death could reach the frontier only after weeks, leaving soldiers uncertain of whose orders to follow. Trade goods traveled slowly, passing through many hands. And yet, compared to what came before, this was speed itself. Rome collapsed distance not by eliminating it, but by making it bearable. The road allowed empire to exist not as scattered provinces, but as a connected whole, the quiet end of a journey. At the end of the day's march, a traveler might stop at a roadside inn. The fire crackled, straw filled the corners, mules stamped their hooves. Over a bowl of lentils and wine, the traveler might reflect on how far he had come and how much farther remained. The road stretched on into the darkness, lit only by torches or moonlight. It was a reminder that Rome's power did not sleep. And so the question lingers. If the Roman roads were the veins that carried life into the empire, what happened when those veins decayed, when stones loosened, milestones toppled, and weeds overtook the ditches? Could an empire survive when its very paths of connection began to crumble? Inns, couriers, and the endless march of feet. When you step onto a Roman road after a long day's travel, the stones beneath you remind you of something more than a path. They remind you of order. Every joint between stones, every milestone on the verge, every ditch carefully angled for runoff. All of it was designed to be regular, predictable, and unchanging. It was Rome asserting permanence against the unpredictable world. Yet a road, no matter how well built, is only as meaningful as the life that travels across it. The empire was never still. From dawn until dusk, and sometimes even into the hours of torchlight, the Roman roads bore the weight of movement. Soldiers marching in tight formation, peasants trudging with baskets of olives, envoys riding quickly with sealed scrolls, slaves driven in chains, and merchants guiding mule carts. The story of the roads is not just in their stones, but in the lives that passed along them. The system of travel, from mansions to mutations. Rome understood that long-distance travel required more than just a surface to walk upon. Along the great routes, especially those used for official business, the state constructed a system of stopping points. These were the mansions, state-run rest houses placed at intervals of 25 to 30 kilometers, roughly a day's travel on foot. Here, an imperial courier or magistrate could find food, fresh animals, and a bed. Between the mansions were smaller stations called mutations. These were little more than stables where a courier could change horses. By leapfrogging from one to the next, the imperial post, the cursus publicus, allowed messages to move at a remarkable speed. An urgent dispatch could travel up to 80 kilometers in a day, carried by riders changing horses repeatedly. Compared to the sluggish communication of most ancient societies, this was astonishingly swift. But for you, an ordinary traveler, such accommodations were out of reach. Unless you carried the special passport of the state, a diploma issued by imperial authority, You could not claim shelter at Amancio. Instead, you turned to the less reputable roadside inns, the Capponi. These were often run by freedmen or lower-class Romans, offering beds of straw, a bowl of barley porridge, and cheap sour wine. They were noisy, crowded places where mules brayed, travelers snored, and dice rattled on wooden tables. Roman writers were scathing about them. Cicero and Seneca described them as dens of thieves and brothels. Yet for most people, they were indispensable. A merchant leading his carts of amphorae could not reach Rome in a single stretch. He needed places like these. A farmer taking surplus grain to market would spend the night in one of their smoky common rooms. In their own way, the Capponi were just as vital to Roman infrastructure as the grand mansions. The courier system and imperial reach. If you imagine Rome's power, think not only of legions, but of letters. A message from the emperor in Rome could be delivered to a provincial governor in Gaul within days, thanks to the courier system. Orders for troop movements, instructions on tax collection, even personal letters, all of it sped along the roads. The couriers were part of the cursus publicus, riding swiftly, showing their diploma to prove authority, and demanding fresh mounts at each mutatio. Ordinary people watched them pass, dust rising behind them, and knew that imperial business was underway. For the subjects of Rome, this was a constant reminder. The emperor's reach was not limited to the city's marble walls. It extended along every road, across every province. And yet, even this system had limits. Letters could still be delayed by storms, broken bridges, or rebellion. A messenger slain by bandits might mean the collapse of communication along a frontier. Governors sometimes acted in ignorance of imperial commands, simply because the road was too long, the distance too vast. For all its efficiency, the Roman road system could not abolish geography, military marches, and the weight of sandals. The roads were, above all else, military tools. The legions depended on them. Marching in formation, 5,000 men could cover 20 miles in a day, sandals slapping against stone in rhythmic unison. Each soldier carried equipment weighing up to 30 kilograms: shield, javelins, rations, cooking pots, and stakes for camp fortifications. The road made this possible. Without it, an army would slog through mud and uneven ground, its pace halved, its morale shaken. Roman discipline demanded endurance. On the road, soldiers sang cadence songs, cursed the weight of their packs, or recited marching orders. They left behind impressions of their hobnailed sandals, caligae, stamped into the dust between paving stones. Archaeologists still find these impressions, faint reminders of endless feet. But the same roads that carried armies to war carried them home again. Victorious generals paraded their troops back to Rome along the Via Appia or Via Flaminia, trophies of conquest on carts, chained captives trailing behind. Roads were not just arteries of movement, they were stages for spectacle. Commerce along the roads. Merchants, too, relied on the network. A Syrian trader might travel the Via Egnatia across the Balkans, selling glass and silk in Italy. A Spanish farmer might ship olive oil amphorae to Rome, stamped with the seal of his estate. Along the roads, markets grew at crossroads where merchants met, exchanging goods and news. Caravans were common, strings of pack animals laden with wine, wool, spices, or metal. Mules were the favored beasts of burden, sure-footed and durable. Their hooves rang on the paving stones as they carried loads day after day. Trade was not easy. Toll stations demanded payment. Bandits preyed on lonely stretches, forcing merchants to hire guards. A cartwheel breaking on a rough patch could delay travel for hours. And yet, the rewards were great. Cities like Rome, with their vast populations, devoured food and goods from across the empire. Without the roads, this constant hunger could not have been fed, the ordinary traveler's burden. For you, as a simple traveler, the road was both blessing and hardship. It gave direction, but it also gave fatigue. You walked mile after mile, sandals wearing thin, shoulders aching from the weight of your bundle. If rain fell, the stones became slick. If the sun beat down, the heat reflected upward. Dust clung to your skin. Your tunic grew stiff with sweat. At night, you sought a roadside inn, hoping for a place by the fire. You haggled with the innkeeper, shared space with strangers, and kept your purse close, wary of theft. You woke with aching limbs, but you walked again, because the road left you no choice. This was the reality for most. Not glamorous, not heroic, but unending. The Roman road was efficient, but it was not kind. It cared little for the pain in your feet or the hunger in your stomach. Its purpose was larger than you, the movement of empire itself. The roads as cultural highways. It is easy to think of the roads only as channels for troops and trade, but they were also conduits of culture. Greek ideas traveled westward, Latin law eastward. Religions moved along them. The mystery cults of the East, the worship of Mithras, and eventually Christianity. Apostles walked these roads, preaching in villages and towns, spreading their message step by step. Entertainers, too, traveled, jugglers, musicians, storytellers. They brought news, songs, and laughter to distant provinces. In this way, the roads were threads of a vast cultural tapestry, weaving together peoples who had once been strangers. The cost of maintenance. A road, however, does not remain perfect without care. The empire devoted resources to upkeep. Local communities were often responsible for repairs in their districts, overseen by officials called curators viarum. Taxes funded the replacement of paving stones, the clearing of ditches, and the repair of bridges. But maintenance was expensive. In remote provinces, roads often fell into disrepair. Stones shifted, weeds grew in the cracks, and surfaces became uneven. Travelers cursed, carts broke, and armies slowed. Even in Rome itself, riders complained of potholes and ruts. The empire had built an astonishing network, but sustaining it was a constant struggle. The endless march. As you imagine walking along a Roman road, you see not just stones, but stories. Each footprint, each cart rut, Each milestone is a fragment of a life. A soldier on his first campaign, a courier bearing urgent orders, a farmer leading his mule, a pilgrim seeking a temple. Their footsteps blended together, forming the rhythm of empire. Yet you cannot help but wonder, if the roads tied Rome together, what happened when they began to fray? When funding dwindled, when provinces rebelled, when soldiers no longer marched in disciplined ranks? Could the empire still endure without the strength of its pathways? Decay, memory, and the afterlife of Roman roads. When you picture a Roman road at its height, you imagine stone paving stretching straight across the countryside, milestones standing upright, and couriers or soldiers hurrying along. But no empire remains unbroken forever. The Roman road system, like the empire itself, faced decline, adaptation, and eventual transformation. Section 3 brings you to the quieter story. What happened to those thousands of miles when Rome's authority faded? The slow fraying of the network. The maintenance of roads was costly. Every stretch of stone needed clearing, repairing, and guarding. Bridges had to be rebuilt after floods, paving stones reset after years of wear, culverts cleared of debris. As long as Rome's central government was strong, taxes and local obligations kept the system functioning. But as the empire weakened in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, these supports frayed. Officials known as curators viarum often struggled to enforce obligations. Local communities resisted the burden of repairing stretches of road when funds were scarce. Provincial governors redirected money to defense instead of infrastructure. The army, which had once helped maintain roads, found itself overextended at the borders. Travelers began to complain. By the late empire, texts mention potholes, broken bridges, and unsafe stretches where weeds overtook the once straight lines. Yet the roads never vanished entirely. Even in disrepair, the Roman preference for straightness meant that the outlines of the roads remained etched into the landscape, guiding traffic long after paving stones crumbled. Roads in a fragmented world. When the empire split, the western provinces bore the brunt of collapse. With fewer resources, road upkeep declined. Armies were no longer able to march rapidly to suppress rebellion. Merchants hesitated to risk long journeys. Bandits found lonely stretches of highway easy prey. Yet the roads still mattered. Germanic tribes who settled in former Roman lands used them, even if not maintaining them to earlier standards. In some regions, paving stones were stripped for use in new buildings. Bridges fell, but fords replaced them. The infrastructure decayed, but the routes themselves were too deeply embedded to disappear. In the Eastern Roman Empire, what we call Byzantium, the system lasted longer. Constantinople oversaw a network of roads that still connected Asia Minor, the Balkans, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Caravans traveled them, armies marched, and imperial couriers still bore messages, though with fewer resources than in Rome's golden days. Medieval survivals. By the Middle Ages, many Roman roads survived in ghostly fashion. Some were still visible as stone lines cutting across farmland. Others became the foundation of medieval tracks. Pilgrims walking to Santiago de Compostela in Spain trod on routes that had once been paved by legionaries. Traders heading to fairs in Champagne or Bruges sometimes followed the skeletons of Roman highways. In Britain, the Fosse Way and Waddling Street remained as recognizable paths. In Italy, the Via Appia became a route lined with ruins, its tombs still standing, though moss-covered and broken. In Gaul, milestones lay toppled in fields, their inscriptions half erased, but their stone mass repurposed in village churches and barns. The memory of Rome's roads lived on in language. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," captured not only geography, but also the cultural memory of a time when the empire's heart was the axis of the world. Medieval maps sometimes traced faint lines of the old system, even when actual paving was gone. Practical afterlives. Even when stones were gone, the alignment of Roman roads influenced settlement patterns. Towns often grew where roads crossed, becoming medieval market centers. Villages clung to old crossroads, where traffic still converged. Bridges built in later centuries often followed Roman foundations. In this way, the Roman roads shaped Europe long after empire faded. They provided skeletons on which new societies grew. The physical stones may have crumbled, but the lines remained engraved in land use, in habit, in geography, roads, and the spread of Christianity. One of the most significant legacies of the Roman road system was the spread of Christianity. Apostles like Paul traveled along them, moving from city to city with relative speed. Letters, such as Paul's epistles, were carried by couriers or companions. Pilgrimages to holy sites depended on the routes Rome had first laid. Without the roads, Christianity's growth would likely have been slower, more fragmented. Instead, ideas traveled as swiftly as goods and soldiers had done before. The roads that once carried imperial orders now carried religious transformation, shaping Europe's spiritual future. Archaeological remnants. Today, you can still find traces of these ancient ways. In Italy, the Via Appia stretches out from Rome, its black basalt stones worn smooth. In England, long straight ridges mark the Fosse Way, visible even in aerial photographs. In Turkey, the Via Egnatia can still be walked, its paving cracked but present. Archaeologists uncover milestones inscribed with the names of emperors, telling us who commissioned each section. Inscriptions boast of Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, or others who oversaw construction. Each stone is both practical and propagandistic, a marker of control and permanence. To walk such a road today is to step not just into the Roman world, but into the countless footsteps layered upon it since. Peasants, crusaders, traders, travelers, pilgrims, archaeologists, tourists. Each added a layer of memory to the same straight line. Reflection, the roads as symbols. In the end, the Roman roads were more than infrastructure. They were metaphors for empire itself, orderly, ambitious, durable, but ultimately vulnerable to time. They embodied Rome's will to control nature, to flatten hills, to cut through forests, to impose geometry upon geography. and for centuries they succeeded. But no road lasts forever without care. The crumbling of the stones mirrored the crumbling of central authority. Weeds sprouting between paving cracks were like rebellions sprouting at the edges of empire. Potholes deepening were like gaps in administration. The fall of Rome was not a single collapse, but a slow wearing away, much like the wearing down of a once smooth surface. Closing thought. As you stand on the remains of a Roman road, watching the horizon, you realize that empires, like roads, are built step by step, stone by stone, and their decay comes just as gradually. What remains are the lines, the straight paths that still shape landscapes, even when the power that built them is long gone. And so you may ask, if roads once made Rome eternal in appearance, what lines of connection make our own world feel eternal today, and how fragile might they truly be?